Okay, I made a mistake. It wasn't even a mistake. I was just living.
You state that the defendant has been an absentee father, full of excuses.
Well, it's not fair to my son, and he really needs to man up.
Believe that from the beginning?
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, I could not
Your Honor, I got proof today that he did sign the birth certificate.
Between 3 and 6 months years old, I received a court paper to go to the state of Ohio child support court. The judge, he looked at me, he said, "This your son, you have nothing to say."
He said, "No, it's my son." We went forth with the child support case.
You don't remember any of that happening?
No, ma'am.
Yes, he did.
That's not the way I remembered it happening.
Well, Your Honor, I want to put this to bed. I'm tired of reliving this. He just keep throwing his man in my face over and making my son feel bad. I'm ready to put it to bed. That's what I want to do and get on with our life.
Right.
In the courtroom of Judge Lauren Lake, the atmosphere is not built on dramatic reenactments but on detailed testimony, legal interpretation, emotional exposure, and the direct confrontation between facts and claims. Multiple parties arrive in court, some insisting on paternal certainty, others clinging to denial, and many carrying regret, silence, old paperwork, and unpaid child support notices. Every participant enters with a version of truth, but only the DNA diagnostics and legal reasoning can determine how the court chooses to record reality. This description focuses exclusively on how the narrative of parental identity unfolds, how evidence is tested under family law, and how the legal standard is applied to difficult human relationships. The court prepares to scrutinize paternity, not through visual dramatization but through structured questions, historic filings, and emotionally charged testimony. In this judicial space, DNA test becomes the core instrument that resolves years of confusion, emotional absence, and unpaid responsibility. It reveals who carries obligation under child support, who is legally recognized on the birth certificate, and who must live with the judgment. Judge Lauren Lake does not merely preside. She interprets how the concept of justice in jurisprudence functions when real families, not theoretical examples, are under examination. In her courtroom, the balance between love, biology, and legal duty is constantly measured. When parties deny signatures, contest filing dates, or claim uncertainty due to overlapping relationships, she evaluates how adverse inference in Evidence Act applies, specifically when a party refuses testing or knowingly delays participation. If a father denies paternity yet signs acknowledgement forms or has wage garnishments showing years of payments, she highlights the legal weight of that history. During these hearings, the participants describe complicated romantic timelines, overlapping relationships, and years of absence. They also speak about children who grew up forming identity without paternal guidance. As they present their narratives, Judge Lake listens not to judge moral behavior, but to determine legal truth. The story is not shaped by camera angles or sentimental montage. It is shaped by records, receipts, court orders, and laboratory reports sealed under chain of custody protocols. The entire courtroom waits for the DNA diagnostics envelope, not because it is dramatic, but because the test is the only final measure the law accepts. Where individuals often go to the Divorce Course podcast or the Game-Changing Attorney podcast to hear about how emotional collapse intersects with legal structure, this court becomes the real-time example. The emotional stakes of separation, infidelity, uncertainty, and long-term absence converge with legal accountability. Many of the parents who arrive in front of Judge Lake express deep regret, not just because of past choices, but because the truth changes everything once documented. Those regrets echo the tone often heard in cheating stories, celebrate recovery testimonies, and even episodes involving adoption stories, full episodes, all of which explore how identity can be altered not through rumor, but through verified results. In cases involving child support arrears, the court evaluates whether payments were consistently made, sporadically attempted, or completely avoided. The defendant often stands before Judge Lake with explanations about unemployment, incarceration, miscommunication, or deliberate avoidance. While those reasons may exist, the court measures responsibility through the legal record rather than emotional expression. When someone declares they refused earlier testing, the principle of adverse inference in Evidence Act becomes relevant. Refusal suggests awareness of likely biological confirmation. The judge reminds parties that law operates independently of personal discomfort. People in this courtroom also bring forward printed emails, pregnancy calendars, photographs of newborns, and documentation from clinics performing the DNA test. When one party insists that physical resemblance alone should determine paternity, Judge Lake clarifies that resemblance is not evidence. Only accredited lab testing and verified records determine lineage in law. This reasoning aligns with how legal scholarship defines the relationship between law and justice. Justice may feel emotional, but law requires demonstrable proof. Many participants express on record that they want clarity not merely for themselves, but for their children. This matters especially when those children have grown to adulthood and now stand in court seeking acknowledgement. Some describe childhoods without paternal guidance, absence at milestones, or feelings of abandonment. Judge Lake absorbs these accounts not to punish fathers, but to illuminate how secrecy and delay create lifelong consequences. Just as truth changes everything, the testing process ends speculation and begins lawful identity. In certain hearings, when a father has previously paid child support for years yet continues to question biology, the court explains how legal fatherhood and biological fatherhood intersect. If signing occurred voluntarily, obligations remain unless legally overturned. If signed under misinformation, fraud claims or statutory relief may apply, but only if properly filed. This is where the concept of justice in jurisprudence becomes visible. Fairness is pursued not emotionally but procedurally, with evidence guiding every outcome. Participants reference podcasts, spiritual rehabilitation programs, and relationship recovery models, such as Celebrate Recovery Testimonies or the Divorce Course podcast, explaining how emotional healing influenced their willingness to return to court. Yet in Judge Lake's environment, healing is not a substitute for documentation. Every personal transformation is acknowledged, but every legal obligation must still be resolved. Observers note that Judge Lake often reminds parents that DNA is not an attack, it is closure. Even if the tested father reacts without celebration, the law records the parentage, and the child gains rightful identity. In a few matters, once test results confirm fatherhood, the newly identified parent may describe discomfort, shock, or delayed acceptance. However, the court clarifies that emotional reaction does not alter biological fact or legal responsibility. The DNA test stands as the ultimate authority. Meanwhile, mothers who testify about overlapping relationships must also accept responsibility for withholding details or allowing confusion to persist. The judge emphasizes that both parents shape the difficulty. A father who fled involvement and a mother who concealed chronology both contribute to years of uncertainty. The courtroom description therefore centers not on who is morally faultless, but on how law interprets responsibility. When adult children address the court, they speak about identity, belonging, and how absence molded their adolescence. These statements are not staged scenes but legal testimony. They describe longing without melodrama, simply presenting the developmental impact. In one case, a grown child expresses hope that biological confirmation will allow a grandparent relationship to form. This demonstrates how paternity affects not just those being tested, but entire generational networks. Judge Lauren Lake continues proceedings with composure, reminding all present that the court is not a platform for humiliation, but a structured environment where family history is finally corrected through verified lab science. When the final result is read, it is done not for shock value, but to finalize the record. Once the father is confirmed, the child's legal lineage is set, and any pending issues, such as child support, inheritance rights, health records, and future benefits, become legally enforceable. The court closes each file not as an ending but as a beginning of truthful identity. It is not a dramatic finale but a lawful correction. This is how relationship between law and justice is portrayed. Law delivers the DNA truth, and justice becomes the emotional repair that follows its acceptance. The continuation of proceedings under Judge Lauren Lake moves deeper into the structural realities of family law. At this point, the court is no longer only clarifying who biologically fathered a child, but how that determination alters every financial, emotional, legal, and social outcome connected to identity. Once the DNA result enters the record, the courtroom shifts from uncertainty to enforcement. In this phase, the system transitions from inquiry to obligation, from confusion to formal recognition. The DNA test becomes not just a scientific answer, but a directive that reshapes household expectations, future responsibilities, and state involvement. Judge Lauren Lake examines how years of informal negotiation, personal doubt, withheld information, and delayed action directly contributed to fractured relationships. In many of these cases, the court notes that avoidance, denial, and silence caused deeper damage than the original conception dispute. The courtroom narrative now emphasizes that paternity truth is not solely important for emotional satisfaction. It is foundational to public health records, official documentation, insurance eligibility, medical history access, citizenship classification, familial titles, and inheritance rights. When truth changes, everything becomes more than a phrase. The legal system demonstrates that clarity is not emotional closure but structural correction. The law does not respond to memory recollection, casual assumption, or instinctive resemblance. It responds only to evidence, lab verification, notarized documentation, and sworn testimony. This distinction is what creates the measurable line between opinion and legal truth. While many individuals reference advice from the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, or stories of personal spiritual rehabilitation in Celebrate Recovery testimonies, Judge Lake repeatedly reinforces that personal growth, while valuable, does not override statutory requirement. The court remains grounded in procedural fairness, certified documents, and measurable actions. As the examination continues, the judge highlights the historical tension between morality and statutory enforcement. In legal theory, this is described as the ongoing debate about the relationship between law and justice. Law delivers accuracy, whereas justice delivers meaning. The court cannot force emotional reconciliation, but it can impose legal certainty. When a father is proven through laboratory-confirmed chain-of-custody DNA test, paternity is no longer up for interpretation. When a mother acknowledges overlapping partners during the conception window, the court does not moralize but calculates probability based on science and calendar. When a child expresses developmental consequences of absence, the court does not assign shame, but confirms that parental duties were not met. As testimony continues, generational impact becomes central. The biological parent confirmed through DNA is not only linked to the child, but also to grandchildren, lineage identity, and familial continuity. Many adult children request results not just to secure history for themselves, but to present accurate origins to their own offspring. While some families enter court fractured, others enter quietly hopeful, believing that closure will allow reconnection. However, Judge Lake reminds all that legal confirmation does not automatically reconcile emotional distrust. Biological truth is a beginning point, not a guaranteed reunion. During these hearings, legal interpretation often intersects with the doctrine of adverse inference in Evidence Act, particularly when a father historically declined testing, ignored subpoenas, or avoided agency contact. The legal inference is that refusal implies anticipated confirmation. The judge applies this principle carefully, noting that avoidance does not invalidate a potential explanation, but it does carry legal weight. The judicial record must reflect not speculation but documented behavior. The refusal, delay, and evasion affect case direction, child support calculations, and enforcement proceedings. Some cases also involve contested birth certificate signatures, notarized acknowledgments, and disputes over who actually supplied a father's name to hospital administration. Judge Lauren Lake dissects each signature, timestamp, witness notation, and filing code. Legal fatherhood, once signed, creates obligations that persist unless successfully reversed through legitimate petition or statutory filing. If a man signed voluntarily, the court cannot undo years of legal fatherhood simply because emotional regret surfaces later. If fraud is alleged, the burden is on the petitioner to produce verifiable proof. This principle reflects the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Truth is not based on personal comfort but on verifiable procedure. In the midst of formal testimony, individuals express how long-term doubt distorted relationships. Many adult children speak of identity confusion, social inconsistency, and emotional withdrawal. Judge Lake listens carefully but stays rooted in law. She emphasizes that emotional discomfort does not rewrite the official narrative, but acknowledgement of truth may allow emotional restructuring outside the courtroom. The legal function ends at certified documentation, but personal healing may begin once denial is removed. The court's involvement ensures that the family record aligns with genetic fact. Financial implications become another critical layer. When paternity is confirmed, child support becomes not a favor but an enforceable debt. When arrears mount, the court recognizes the obligation even if emotional involvement was absent. State enforcement agencies track wage garnishment, modification filings, unpaid medical expenses, and educational support needs. The court clarifies that family law is not punitive but corrective. Payments are not punishment for absence but provision for the child's right to support. This emphasis mirrors discussions explored on Truth Changes Everything podcast, where restoration begins with admission, but responsibility must accompany revelation. In cases where multiple partners existed in the conception timeline, Judge Lake clarifies that uncertainty does not nullify responsibility. Both parents contributed to confusion by withholding, avoiding, or misrepresenting. The revelation stage becomes the legal moment of reset. The court's explanation stresses that parenthood is not optional once confirmed through evidence. Whether a father expresses shock, resistance, or neutrality, the law remains consistent. Whether a mother expresses regret, justification, or personal difficulty, the legal record will not shift. Throughout, the courtroom maintains a tone centered on legal clarity, not dramatic tension. The DNA test envelopes, while symbolically heavy, are presented not as emotional theatrics but as final scientific entries in the official record. The confirmation or exclusion documented within them is the factual endpoint of years of speculation. When results finalize, obligations are set, lineage is acknowledged, and identity becomes legally accurate. Additionally, tensions surrounding romantic betrayal, broken trust, and long-term denial are acknowledged but not adjudicated as moral matters. Judge Lake emphasizes that personal heartbreak belongs to the realm of family restoration, private counseling, support groups, or reflective formats like relationship-focused episodes from the Divorce Course podcast. In contrast, the legal system handles only parentage, obligation, and identity. As cases progress, the courtroom also examines extended family implications. If a child was raised without grandparents, half-siblings, or genetic medical information, the confirmed parentage provides access to necessary files. Medical history becomes a legal asset. State systems update records. Insurance carriers adjust files. Inheritance rights solidify. All of this originates from the laboratory-confirmed DNA test, which functions as the gatekeeper of lineage law. Judge Lauren Lake repeatedly reinforces that the court is not assigning worth to individuals but documenting truth. She clarifies that emotional distance after testing may indicate discomfort, surprise, avoidance, or unresolved tension, but does not erase biology. The relationship between law and justice is again highlighted. Law establishes fact, justice attempts repair but cannot be mandated. This portion of the narrative concludes with the reminder that paternity court is not designed to humiliate, elevate, or punish. It exists to resolve identity with scientific precision. A confirmed parent may express little emotion, while a child expresses profound relief. The court records both responses, but prioritizes the biological conclusion. The next section will continue with final legal interpretations, post-verdict emotional summaries, identity stabilization, child support restructuring, and the broader social meaning of DNA-based truth. With Judge Lauren Lake having completed the rigorous scientific and legal establishment of paternity, the courtroom enters its final phase, the reconfiguration of identity, responsibility, and post-verdict obligations. The DNA test has already served as the primary evidentiary authority, closing debates that stretched across decades, broken relationships, repeated petitions, and layered denials. Now, the court turns to the aftermath, which is governed not by emotion but by structured legal directives. When the lab result settles into the record, it becomes the official anchor of all subsequent legal action. Child support recalculations, arrears enforcement, visitation structure, inheritance eligibility, health record disclosure, and surname alignment become functions of documented truth rather than emotional preference. The state recognizes the tested parent not merely as a biological origin, but as a legally obligated caretaker under existing statutes. This final transformation within the courtroom illustrates the applied version of what scholars call the concept of justice in jurisprudence. Justice is not defined by personal relief, but by correct application of the law. Judge Lauren Lake continues by clarifying that paternity is not a symbolic victory. It is the entry point for a continuous legal relationship. Even when a parent expresses stiffness, discomfort, shock, detachment, or disappointment after results, those reactions do not dismantle the verified genetic connection. The legal system does not operate on internal acceptance but on external evidence. In this way, the final stage of the case moves beyond who fathered the child into the structural meaning of fatherhood. The adult or minor child involved now stands within a formal lineage network. This includes social, medical, and economic dimensions. Health records become accessible, which matters significantly for hereditary conditions, genetic disorders, organ donor compatibility, mental health predisposition, and future family planning. Legal identity also becomes accurate in census registration, passport data, school documentation, insurance beneficiary nomination, and potential adoption registry filings. Where victims of uncertain identity once sought narrative clarity, they now possess state-confirmed legitimacy. During the final deliberative narrative, Judge Lake emphasizes that the testing does not erase emotional harm nor automatically repair years of abandonment or confusion. The court cannot fabricate connection where history placed distance, nor can it legislate affection. It can only legislate truth. Thus, the final function of the court aligns closely with discussions found in Truth Changes Everything podcast and similarly formatted reflections in relationship-based learning content. But the law remains disinterested in healing as a metric. Instead, it creates a platform upon which healing may be attempted outside formal proceedings. Financial obligations post-verdict take center focus. When unpaid child support remains on record, those debts do not dissolve simply because emotional reactions are heavy or because the tested parent expresses late-stage regret. Arrears remain collectible under state enforcement processes. Wage garnishment, retroactive payment adjustments, support modification petitions, and compliance monitoring stand as binding components of post-verdict structure. The court recognizes that while the biological truth altered the narrative, responsibility existed throughout the child's upbringing, and thus accountability remains anchored, even if relational participation was absent at the time. Where previously doubt blurred parenting boundaries, now the DNA test establishes a permanent legal fatherhood, eliminating the possibility of future dispute, denial, or circumstantial evasion. The laboratory result will remain part of the official court record, enforceable across jurisdictions including family court, probate court, and in select cases, international custody clarification. The stability of the finding is what scholars identify as lasting legal finality. Judge Lake also guides participants through the difference between moral responsibility and enforceable duty. Many parents declare emotional apology, remorse, or reflection similar to narratives expressed on Celebrate Recovery testimonies or guidance-based material from the Divorce Course podcast. But the court identifies these as personal evolutions rather than legal settlements. Though meaningful, emotional gestures do not replace financial responsibility, documentation requirements, or identity correction. This is where the relationship between law and justice reveals its complexity. Law delivers scientific clarity through the DNA test. Justice, if achieved at all, arrives through voluntary emotional acknowledgement outside the bench. The court acknowledges that some parents will withdraw further even after confirmation, choosing silence and emotional distance. In contrast, others will step forward, reshaping their role, initiating connection, pursuing delayed involvement, or seeking reconciliation. The court does not evaluate intention, it documents reality. The closure phase also considers broader social implications. Verified parentage affects extended family structures. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, and siblings enter defined connections previously suspended in ambiguity. Some families will integrate, expanding networks and allowing belonging. Others will preserve distance, preferring minimal interaction beyond legal necessity. These varied outcomes are not subject to judge intervention. The court exists not to engineer harmony, but to authenticate identity. In final legal commentary, Judge Lauren Lake reiterates that paternity truth is neither reward nor punishment. It is an element of civil order. Lineage clarity forms the basis for inheritance rights, guardianship transfers, adoption eligibility, next of kin protocols, and life insurance determinations. It impacts burial decisions, emergency authorizations, and medical consent authority. This reality aligns more closely with legal scholarship than public emotion. Parentage determines authority under law. The adverse inference in Evidence Act appears once more in final evaluation. Parents who previously avoided testing cannot retroactively escape the implications of delay. The court recognizes refusal as indicative of anticipated confirmation, and this principle influences arrear collection, documentation pathways, and, when applicable, sanction determination. It reinforces that law interprets avoidance as evidence, not neutrality. In reviewing all testimony, Judge Lake positions the courtroom not as a moral tribunal but as a corrective system. She underscores that years of denial, overlapping relationships, incomplete disclosure, mistaken identity assumptions, and emotional turbulence created consequences for the child first, not the adults. The legal system's intervention, guided by accredited DNA diagnostics, rectifies the record in favor of the child's right to truth. This aligns with the consistent tone of accountability described in legal educational platforms similar to the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, where resolution depends on structured evidence, not sentiment. In conclusion, the final ruling remains grounded in scientific verification, statutory policy, and documented identity. The court acknowledges that emotional restoration requires separate paths: counseling, family reconciliation, mediated dialogue, spiritual rebuilding, or reflective learning models. The law's duty ends at the threshold of truth. Everything that follows belongs to human choice. Through the lens of Judge Lauren Lake's paternity jurisdiction, this narrative serves as a demonstration of how modern family law integrates science, legal theory, and social responsibility. The DNA test stands as the decisive pivot of the entire judicial journey. Once the truth is recorded, the courtroom closes its file and releases the parties not into resolution but into factual alignment. Legal identity has been authenticated. Biological lineage has been established. Responsibility is now enforceable, and the state recognizes the parent-child tie without qualification. No further argument, emotional declaration, or historical confusion can change that outcome. This is the final legal function of paternity court, not dramatic storytelling, but structural truth that is permanent, recorded, and sovereign over personal discomfort.